when Keanu Reeves is kidnapped by the mysterious Black Veil. His loyal Belgian Malinois, Shadow, embarks on a relentless mission to save him. As Shadow fights through mercenaries and near-impossible odds, Keanu uncovers a terrifying truth. Shadow was part of Project Revenant, a classified military experiment to create the perfect K-9 operative. Now, Black Veil wants their creation back, or dead, with the help of an ex-CIA agent. Keanu and Shadow expose the organization's dark secrets, but not without sacrifice. In the final showdown, Shadow is critically wounded while saving Keanu. Yet against all odds, he survives. Together, they take down Black Veil and finally find peace. What did you think of this action-packed story? Where are you watching from? Comment below. Subscribe to DG Story for more thrilling and emotional tales. The streets of Los Angeles hummed with the quiet energy of the night. Streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across the empty sidewalks. Keanu Reeves walked steadily, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. Beside him, his loyal Belgian Malinois, Shadow, padded silently, ears alert, eyes constantly scanning. To most, Shadow was just a dog, an impressive one, no doubt, with his sleek black and tan coat and intelligent gaze. But to Keanu, Shadow was more than a companion. He was family. Keanu had adopted Shadow years ago after working with K-9 units on a film. The bond had been instant. Shadow wasn't just any dog, he was trained for precision, for protection, for loyalty beyond question. Tonight was supposed to be just another walk, another quiet moment between man and dog, but something felt off. Shadow's ears twitched, his muscles tensed. Keanu felt it too, that creeping sensation of being watched. As they neared Keanu's home, Shadow slowed, his head lowered slightly, and his nostrils flared as he sniffed the air. Keanu stopped. "You sense something, buddy?" he murmured. Shadow didn't respond, but his posture shifted into alert mode, body stiff. Eyes locked onto something invisible in the darkness. Keanu's instincts, honed from years of stunt training and action films, kicked in. He wasn't alone. Then a rustling sound. Keanu turned sharply, but the street behind him was empty. Shadow let out a low, almost imperceptible growl. Keanu exhaled. Maybe it was nothing. Still, as he reached his house, he double-checked the locks before stepping inside. Shadow followed but remained near the door, standing guard. Then, Keanu noticed it. A letter slipped under his door. He picked it up, unfolded the page. The words were handwritten, ink slightly smudged as if written in haste. "You have something we need. Sooner or later, you'll have to hand it over. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Keanu frowned. He had no idea what this meant. Shadow, as if sensing the shift in the air, moved closer, nudging Keanu's hand with his cold nose. Keanu sighed and scratched behind Shadow's ears. Probably some weird prank. Still, he folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "This isn't over." That night, Keanu went to bed, but Shadow never left his post by the door. The dog barely blinked, muscles coiled, as if waiting for something unseen. And then it happened. A loud crash. Keanu jolted awake. Before he could react, the door burst open. Dark figures stormed inside, silent, precise, armed. Shadow was already in motion. A snarl ripped through the air as Shadow lunged, sinking his teeth into the first intruder's arm. The man let out a strangled cry, staggering back. But the others were ready. A hissing sound, a dart shot through the air. Shadow let out a sharp yelp. Keanu's chest tightened. "No!" His vision blurred as hands grabbed him. A cloth pressed over his face. Everything faded. The last thing Keanu saw before the darkness swallowed him. Shadow, struggling, fighting until he collapsed. And then, nothing. The first thing Keanu felt when he woke up was pain. A dull, throbbing ache in his head. His body was sluggish, heavy, as if he had been drugged. He tried to move, but his wrists were bound. cold metal bit into his skin. His vision adjusted to the dim lighting of a windowless room, concrete walls. A single overhead bulb casting eerie shadows. The last thing he remembered was Shadow, his dog, his protector, his friend, fighting with everything he had before succumbing to the tranquilizer dart. Keanu's jaw tightened. Where was Shadow now? A door creaked open. Footsteps, measured, controlled. A man entered, a presence wrapped in authority. His suit was sharp, his movements calculated. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, with cold, piercing eyes that studied Keanu like a chess piece. "Mr. Reeves," the man said, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. "I was hoping we wouldn't have to meet like this." Keanu kept his expression unreadable. "I'd say it's a pleasure, but you did drug and kidnap me, so let's skip the pleasantries." The man chuckled. "I suppose that's fair." He stepped closer, placing a folder on the table. "Do you know why you're here?" Keanu shook his head. "I was hoping you'd tell me." The man exhaled as if disappointed. He opened the folder, revealing surveillance photos of Keanu and Shadow. Keanu's stomach tightened. The man tapped the images. "That dog of yours, Shadow, he's special." Keanu's eyes darkened. "If you've hurt him, we haven't." The man interrupted. "At least, not yet." Keanu clenched his fists. "Then what do you want?" The man's lips curled slightly. "Not what? Who?" Elsewhere, in an undisclosed location. Shadow's ears twitched. Pain pulsed through his body. His head was foggy, his limbs sluggish. But then the scent. Keanu was gone. Shadow's eyes snapped open. His surroundings were unfamiliar, a sterile kennel, locked in with metal bars. Other dogs, trained guard dogs, were held in nearby cages. Shadow sniffed the air. His mind was still hazy, but one thought cut through the fog like a knife. Find Keanu. Protect Keanu. A guard passed by, barely sparing the cage a glance. Mistake. Shadow remained still, waiting, calculating. He could hear footsteps, breathing, key jingling, patterns he memorized instantly. Then an opportunity. As the guard bent down to adjust something, Shadow launched himself forward, slamming into the door with brute force and precision. The latch cracked. The guard spun around, but Shadow was already on him. Teeth met flesh. A scream, a struggle, a body hitting the floor. Shadow was free. His heart pounded. His instincts sharpened. Find Keanu, no matter what. And so, the hunt began. Shadow moved like a ghost through the corridors of the facility, his paws barely making a sound against the cold concrete floor. The place smelled of metal, sweat, and danger, but more importantly, carried Keanu's scent. He was close. Shadow's mind worked like a well-oiled machine, analyzing everything. He had trained for this: escape, pursuit, survival. His body still ached from the tranquilizer, but adrenaline surged through his veins, keeping him sharp. Ahead, voices echoed down the hallway. Guards, armed. Shadow pressed himself against the shadows, his ears flicking as he listened. "The boss wants him alive, but I don't see why. He's just an actor." A chuckle. "Yeah, but apparently he has something they want." Shadow's eyes narrowed. It didn't matter what they wanted. Keanu needed him, and he was getting him back. A guard turned the corner, heading straight for Shadow's hiding spot. Big mistake. With lightning speed, Shadow lunged, silent and precise. His powerful jaws clamped down on the man's wrist, twisting it brutally. The guard let out a muffled cry as he collapsed. The second guard spun around, reaching for his radio. "We have an ES." Shadow didn't give him the chance. A blur of muscle and fur slammed into the man's chest, knocking him into the wall. Shadow's teeth sank into his vest, yanking him down. Two down. Shadow didn't linger. He had already memorized the layout of the facility. Keanu was being held deeper inside. He sprinted forward. Meanwhile, in his dimly lit cell, Keanu was not sitting idly. The cuffs binding his wrists were tight, but he had spent years training for action sequences. He knew how to manipulate his body, how to escape holds, how to fight smart. He had already worked the metal cuffs loose against the sharp edge of the table leg. He just needed a distraction. That's when he heard it. A snarl, a crash, the sound of men shouting. A slow grin spread across Keanu's face. Shadow was coming. The door burst open, and a guard rushed in, gun drawn. Too late. Keanu was already moving. A swift kick to the knee sent the man sprawling. Before he could react, Keanu grabbed the fallen gun, flipped it in his hands, and aimed. "Not today," Keanu muttered. He stepped over the unconscious guard and headed toward the chaos. Shadow tore through the facility like a storm, taking down enemy after enemy with speed and precision. Then he caught the scent. Keanu. The moment Shadow rounded the corner, his eyes locked onto his owner. For the first time in hours, his tail wagged. Keanu grinned. "Hey, buddy." But the reunion was short-lived. Gunfire erupted from behind. Keanu ducked, dragging Shadow behind cover. Bullets shredded the air where they had stood just seconds before. Shadow growled, muscles tensed. He was ready. Keanu exhaled, checking the stolen gun. One clip. Not enough. He looked at Shadow. "You up for this?" Shadow's response was immediate, a low, determined growl. Keanu smirked. "All right, let's finish this." And together, man and dog charged forward. The air crackled with gunfire, each shot echoing through the concrete walls. Keanu ducked behind cover, his grip tightening around the stolen pistol. Shadow crouched beside him, ears perked, muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. For guards, armed, ready. Keanu exhaled slowly. One clip. He needed to make every bullet count. He glanced at Shadow. "You take left, I take right." Shadow didn't need a second command. He moved. Like a ghost, he darted through the shadows, his paws silent against the cold floor. The first guard barely had time to react before Shadow lunged, knocking him to the ground. Keanu took the opening. Bang! One clean shot. The second guard collapsed. Shadow twisted mid-air, dodging a baton swing, then clamped his jaws around the third guard's arm. The sickening crunch of bone filled the hallway. The man screamed, dropping his weapon. The fourth guard raised his rifle. Keanu didn't hesitate. Bang! A perfect shot to the shoulder sent the last attacker spinning to the ground. Silence. Keanu exhaled, his pulse still pounding. He turned to Shadow, who was panting, his coat slick with sweat but eyes burning with determination. Keanu smirked. "Not bad, buddy." Shadow wagged his tail. "Just a little." They didn't have much time. More guards would be coming. Keanu scanned the hallway. There had to be an exit. Then a flicker of movement on a security monitor. A vehicle. An armored truck. Keanu grinned. "Looks like we found our ride." Shadow barked once, as if in agreement. The next corridor was clear, too clear. Keanu slowed his steps. Shadow stopped beside him, ears twitching. A trap. Then the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the hallway. Keanu tensed. He could feel them moving. The quiet shuffle of boots. The soft click of a safety being switched off. Shadow growled. A voice echoed through the darkness. "Mr. Reeves, you really think you can just walk out of here?" Keanu smirked, raising his pistol. "Yeah, I do." The lights flashed back on, and chaos erupted. A wave of mercenaries flooded the corridor. Keanu moved first. His pistol barked twice, 2 headshots. Clean, precise. Shadow was already on the third man, ripping through body armor, his teeth finding the gap between plates. A baton swung toward Keanu's ribs. He dodged, caught the attacker's wrist, twisted a crack. The man dropped. More gunfire. Too many of them. Keanu grabbed a fallen rifle and turned, only to see Shadow jump onto a mercenary twice his size, jaws locking onto his throat. "Shadow down," Keanu commanded. Shadow obeyed instantly, dropping low as Keanu fired a final shot. The last mercenary collapsed. Silence. Keanu breathed heavily, gripping his rifle. His gaze met Shadow's. They were alive, but the mission wasn't over yet. Keanu and Shadow sprinted toward the loading bay, where the armored truck waited. "Cover me, buddy," Keanu muttered, yanking the door open. Shadow stood guard, eyes sharp, scanning the darkness. The engine roared to life. Then the alarm blared. Keanu cursed. Reinforcements were coming. Shadow jumped into the passenger seat just as the first wave of enemies appeared. Keanu floored the gas. The truck lurched forward. Gunfire rattled against the armor. But Keanu didn't stop. He smashed through the security gates, tires screeching as they skidded onto the open road. Shadow turned, watching the facility fade into the distance. They had made it out, but this wasn't over. Keanu gripped the wheel. "Let's go hunting, buddy," Shadow growled, and together they drove toward the fight that was still to come. The armored truck roared down the deserted highway, its headlights cutting through the inky darkness. Keanu gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. Shadow sat beside him, ears erect, eyes locked on the road ahead. They had escaped, but they were far from safe. Keanu glanced at the rearview mirror. 3 black SUVs, closing in fast. "Looks like they don't want us leaving," Keanu muttered. Shadow growled in response. The first SUV pulled up alongside the truck. A mercenary leaning out the window, rifle in hand. Keanu yanked the wheel hard to the left. Crash. The armored truck slammed into the SUV, sending it spiraling off the road. The second SUV sped up, positioning itself behind them. The barrel of a mounted machine gun poked out of the sunroof. Keanu's stomach tightened. That's not good. Then, gunfire erupted. Bullets rattled against the truck's reinforced frame, sparks flying. Keanu gritted his teeth, swerving to avoid the worst of the damage. Shadow let out a sharp bark, his body tense. Keanu knew what that meant. Shadow had a plan. Keanu's eyes flicked to the second SUV. The window was open, and Shadow was already moving. "Go!" Keanu shouted. With a powerful leap, Shadow launched himself through the air. The mercenary never saw it coming. Shadow crashed into the man, knocking him against the dashboard. Teeth met flesh. A scream. Blood. The driver panicked. The SUV swerved violently, then flipped. Keanu didn't slow down. One more to go. The third SUV was gaining. Fast. Keanu's mind raced. He couldn't outrun them. He had to outthink them. Then he saw it. Up ahead, a narrow bridge spanning a deep ravine. Keanu's lips curled into a smirk. "Let's see if you can fly." As the SUV pulled up beside him, Keanu jerked the wheel hard right. The truck slammed into the enemy vehicle, forcing it toward the bridge's crumbling edge. Tires screeched. The mercenary inside had just enough time to realize what was happening before. The SUV plunged into the abyss. Keanu exhaled. They were clear. But there was one problem. Shadow. Keanu slammed the brakes, skidding to a stop on the bridge. He jumped out, scanning the wreckage below. Shadow. For a terrifying moment, there was nothing. Then movement. From the wreckage of the overturned SUV, Shadow emerged, bruised, bleeding, but alive. Keanu let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Come here, buddy." Shadow limped toward him, and Keanu dropped to his knees, running his hands over the dog's body. "You're insane. You know that?" he muttered, voice thick with relief. Shadow wagged his tail. Keanu chuckled. "Yeah, I'm glad you're okay too." But as they climbed back into the truck, Keanu's expression hardened. This wasn't over. The people who took him, who came after them, they wanted something. And Keanu was going to find out exactly what. He started the engine. "Let's go hunting, buddy," Shadow growled. And together, they drove into the night. The armored truck thundered down the dark highway, the distant city lights shimmering on the horizon. Keanu's grip on the wheel was firm, his mind racing. Who were these people? What did they want from him? Shadow lay in the passenger seat, his breathing heavy but steady. He was injured, cuts along his side, bruises forming under his sleek coat, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning the road as if sensing danger still lurked. Keanu reached over, running a hand through Shadow's fur. "You scared me back there, buddy." Shadow huffed, as if to say, "You should have known I'd make it." Keanu smirked. Yeah, you're unstoppable." But as much as he appreciated the moment, they weren't safe yet. They needed answers. Keanu pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. He found the name he was looking for: Jake Monroe, ex-CIA, Black Ops Specialist. If anyone knew who these people were, it was Jake. Keanu hit the call button. The phone rang twice before a voice answered, low and gruff. "I was wondering when you'd call." Keanu's brow furrowed. "You heard." "I hear everything," Jake said. "And I also know you barely made it out alive." Keanu exhaled. "Then tell me, who the hell are they?" Pause. "Then, they call themselves Black Veil." Keanu's stomach tightened. "Sounds dramatic." Jake didn't laugh. "They're not a joke, Keanu. They operate in the shadows, dealing in stolen intel, assassinations, and high-value targets. If they took you, it wasn't random." Keanu glanced at Shadow, who was now fully alert, ears perked. "Then what do they want from me?" Another pause. Then Jake spoke carefully. "It's not you they want, Keanu." Keanu's fingers tightened around the wheel. "Then what?" Jake exhaled. "It's Shadow." Silence. Keanu's pulse pounded. "You're telling me they kidnapped me to get to my dog?" "I'm telling you that Shadow isn't just a dog," Jake said. "I've done some digging before you adopted him. Shadow belonged to a classified military program, one designed to create the perfect K-9 operative." Keanu's jaw clenched. "I trained with Shadow myself. I know he's exceptional. But he's more than that." Jake cut in. "Shadow was part of Project Revenant, a secret initiative where dogs were enhanced for high-risk missions. Faster, stronger, smarter than any normal K-9. Keanu's mind reeled. He looked at Shadow, his unwavering focus, his almost human-like intelligence. Had he always known? Jake continued. "Shadow went missing during his last mission. The government wiped his records, assumed he was dead. But now, Black Veil knows he's alive." Keanu exhaled sharply. "And they want him back. Or they want him gone." Keanu's fingers curled into a fist. He looked at Shadow, whose eyes met his without fear. Shadow had saved his life again and again. Now, it was Keanu's turn to protect him. Keanu pulled the truck to the side of the road, taking a deep breath. "All right, Jake, where do I start?" There was a pause. Then, "There's a man in New Mexico. Name's Dr. Victor Langley. He was one of the lead scientists on Project Revenant before he disappeared." Keanu nodded. "And let me guess, he's the only one who can tell me what Shadow really is." "Bingo!" Keanu glanced at Shadow. "Then I guess we're going to New Mexico. Be careful, Keanu," Jake warned. "Black Veil won't stop until they have him, and they don't leave loose ends." Keanu smirked. "Yeah, neither do I." He hung up, shifted the truck into gear, and turned toward the desert. Shadow watched him carefully, then let out a small huff of approval. Keanu grinned. "Come on, buddy. Let's find out what they don't want us to know." And with that, they disappeared into the night. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, the desert wind howling through the cracks of the armored truck's windows. Keanu's grip on the wheel was firm. His mind locked onto a single thought: find Dr. Victor Langley before Black Veil does. Shadow lay beside him, his breathing steady. He had recovered from the earlier battle, but his eyes never stopped scanning the surroundings. He knew as well as Keanu did they weren't alone. Keanu's instincts kicked in when he noticed the headlights in the rearview mirror. One car, then two, then three. They were being followed. He tightened his jaw. Black Veil had found them. Shadow sat up, ears twitching. He let out a low growl, a warning. Keanu inhaled deeply. "All right, buddy, Let's make this interesting. The first SUV sped up. Moving alongside them, a tinted window rolled down. A rifle barrel emerged. Keanu slammed the brakes. The gunman missed. The truck skidded sideways, tires screaming. The pursuing SUVs swerved, trying to recover. Keanu saw his opening. He yanked the wheel hard to the right, sending the armored truck barreling off-road into the desert. Dust exploded into the air as the truck tore through dry terrain. Bouncing over uneven ground, the SUVs followed, kicking up a storm behind them. Shadow jumped into action. As the nearest vehicle came too close, Keanu hit the brakes just long enough for Shadow to leap out of the open window. He landed on the hood of the SUV, claws digging into metal. The driver panicked. Shadow's teeth flashed, ripping through the windshield. The SUV veered sharply, flipping over and crashing into a rock. One down. Shadow rolled midair and landed gracefully, immediately sprinting back toward the truck. Keanu swung the door open just in time. Shadow leaped back inside. Keanu smirked. "Nice work." Shadow huffed, his tail flicking. The second SUV came in hot, a mounted gun spraying bullets at them. Keanu growled, "You want to play rough?" He jerked the wheel hard left. The truck's reinforced bumper smashed into the SUV's side. Crash. The enemy vehicle flipped twice before bursting into flames. Now, only one SUV remained. Keanu spotted a canyon up ahead, deep, steep, deadly. A plan formed in his mind. He slowed the truck just enough, baiting the last pursuer closer. The SUV took the bait, racing forward, his driver thinking Keanu had lost control. Keanu whispered, "Not today." At the last second, he swerved left. The enemy SUV didn't have time to react. It launched straight off the canyon's edge. Keanu watched as it disappeared into the abyss. Gone. He exhaled. "That's 3. Shadow barked once, as if to say, "What's next?" Keanu smirked. "Now, we find Langley." And with that, they disappeared into the desert. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, golden sand blending into the horizon. Keanu gripped the wheel tightly as the armored truck rumbled over uneven terrain. Shadow sat beside him, alert, his golden brown eyes scanning the surroundings for any threats. They had won the last fight, but Keanu knew Black Veil wouldn't stop. Now, their only chance lay with Dr. Victor Langley, the man who had once worked on Project Revenant, the secret program that had turned Shadow into something more than just a dog. Keanu glanced at Shadow. What had they done to him? Why did they want him back? He was about to find out. An hour later, Keanu spotted a small, abandoned gas station at the edge of the desert. It looked empty, too empty. He parked the truck a safe distance away. "Stay close, buddy." Shadow leapt out first, nose twitching. He was already scanning for threats. Keanu followed cautiously, gun raised. The wind howled through the broken windows, dust swirling in the air. Then, a whisper of movement. Keanu spun, gun aimed. A man emerged from the shadows, older, bearded, his face worn with time and regret. Dr. Victor Langley. Langley raised his hands. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Keanu kept his aim steady. "Black Veil is looking for you." Langley smirked. "They've been looking for me for years." Shadow growled, his stance tense. Langley's gaze dropped to the dog. "And there he is, the last of the Revenant dogs." Keanu's pulse quickened. "You created him." Langley nodded. "Not just him, others. But Shadow was different. The best." Keanu's jaw clenched. "Why do they want him?" Langley hesitated, then took a slow breath. "Because he knows something that can destroy them." Keanu exhaled sharply. "What does that mean?" Langley motioned toward an old wooden table covered in files, photographs, classified documents. "You think Shadow was just a military K-9? Langley asked. "No, he was part of something bigger." Keanu flipped through the documents. Photos of dogs, each one labeled with a name and a number. Some files were stamped terminated. His stomach tightened. What happened to the others? Langley's face darkened. Black Veil didn't just train them, they experimented on them. Keanu's blood ran cold. Langley continued. Shadow was one of the few that survived. But what Black Veil doesn't realize is that he carries something they lost. Something hidden in his mind, locked in his training. And if they get him back, they'll erase it before he can expose them. Keanu looked down at Shadow. The dog stared back, his expression unreadable, but his eyes said everything. He remembered. He had survived something horrific, and Black Veil wanted to bury the truth. Langley grabbed a small USB drive and tossed it to Keanu. "This has everything," he said. "Their locations, their operatives, their plans. Take it and run." Keanu caught the drive, but his instincts screamed something wasn't right. Then a gunshot. Langley jerked backward. A red bloom spread across his chest. Keanu spun. Black Veil had found them. "Go!" Langley gasped. Before collapsing, Shadow barked a warning. Keanu didn't hesitate. He grabbed the drive, scooped up Shadow, and sprinted toward the truck. Gunfire exploded behind them. Keanu dove into the driver's seat, slamming the gas. The truck roared forward just as bullets shredded the ground where they had stood. Shadow was already up, head out the window, ears pinned back. Keanu gritted his teeth. "Hold on, buddy." A Black Veil convoy appeared in the rearview mirror. 3 SUVs, armed men, coming fast. Shadow growled. Keanu smirked. "Yeah, I see them." This wasn't over. This was just the beginning, and they were ready for war. The desert night exploded with gunfire. Keanu gripped the wheel as the armored truck tore through the dirt road, bullets pinging off the reinforced metal. The Black Veil convoy was closing in fast, 3 SUVs, each packed with highly trained operatives, all armed and out for blood. Beside him, Shadow crouched, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. His eyes burned with determination. Keanu stole a glance at the USB drive clenched in his hand. This was their proof. This was what Black Veil was willing to kill for. And if they didn't make it out alive, it would never see the light of day. Keanu exhaled. Not an option. The first SUV swerved left, trying to flank them. A gunman leaned out, rifle aimed. Keanu jerked the wheel hard right. The truck fishtailed, dust erupting in a thick cloud. The shooter's aim went wide. Shadow barked sharply, his signal. Keanu understood instantly. "Go!" he commanded. Shadow leaped. The gunman barely had time to react before a blur of fur and muscle smashed into him. Shadow's jaws clamped down on the man's wrist, twisting savagely. The rifle clattered to the ground as the mercenary screamed. The SUV veered off course, hitting a ditch and flipping 3 times before bursting into flames. One down. Shadow landed in the dirt, rolling before sprinting back toward the truck. Keanu flung the door open, slowing just enough for Shadow to jump back inside. Keanu smirked. "You're insane." Shadow wagged his tail. The second SUV pulled up behind them, its passenger leaning out with a grenade launcher. Keanu's pulse spiked. "Oh, come on." The enemy fired. Keanu yanked the wheel left. The truck barely dodged the blast, the explosion sending flames shooting into the sky. Shadow growled, his ears pinned back. Keanu's mind raced. He needed an opening. Then he saw it. Up ahead, collapsed bridge, a narrow support beam still standing over the canyon. It was a gamble, a big one. Keanu inhaled. "Hold on, buddy." He floored it. The truck barreled toward the canyon's edge, gaining speed. The second SUV followed, the driver realizing too late what was happening. Keanu yanked the wheel at the last second. The armored truck jumped onto the narrow bridge support. The SUV? Straight into the abyss. Keanu didn't slow down. The truck bounced dangerously over the beam, teetering on the edge of destruction. Keanu gritted his teeth, forcing it to stay straight. Then solid ground. They made it. Keanu exhaled sharply. That was close. Shadow huffed, unimpressed. Keanu smirked. All right. Next time I'll let you drive." 1 SUV left, sped ahead, cutting them off. The back doors burst open. A Black Veil operative stepped out, a high-powered sniper rifle aimed directly at Keanu. Keanu clenched his jaw. He had no time to react. The sniper pulled the trigger. A single shot echoed through the night. Keanu heard it before he felt it. A sharp yelp. His head snapped toward Shadow, his partner, his friend staggering, blood seeping into his fur. Keanu's breath caught. No, Shadow didn't go down. Instead, he charged, limping, bleeding, but unstoppable. With his last ounce of strength, Shadow leaped. Jaws met throat. The sniper's eyes widened in horror before he was torn from the vehicle, crashing into the desert below. The SUV skidded, spun out of control, and flipped, slamming into the canyon wall in a fiery explosion. The battle was over. Keanu slammed the brakes. He rushed to Shadow's side, dropping to his knees. "Hey, buddy." His voice cracked. "You're gonna be okay." Shadow let out a weak breath. His eyes half-lidded. Blood dripped from his side, staining the sand beneath him. Keanu's hands shook as he pressed against the wound. "Stay with me, okay?" Shadow's gaze met his. Tired, loyal, unafraid. Keanu choked back a sob. "You did good, buddy. You saved me. You saved all of us." Shadow's tail moved just slightly. Keanu clenched his jaw. He refused to let this be the end. He scooped Shadow into his arms, ignoring the pain in his own body. "I got you," he whispered. "I promise." And with that, Keanu Reeves carried his best friend into the night, toward the only hope they had left. Keanu drove like hell. The armored truck roared through the desert, kicking up dust as he pushed the engine to its limits. Shadow lay in the passenger seat, his breath shallow, his fur soaked with blood. Keanu's hands gripped the wheel tightly. "Stay with me, buddy." His voice was hoarse. "We're almost there." Ahead, the faint glow of a small, hidden airstrip appeared on the horizon. Jake Monroe, ex-CIA. The only person Keanu could trust was waiting, and Shadow's life depended on it. Keanu slammed the brakes, skidding to a stop beside a waiting private jet. Jake was already running toward them. "Jesus," Jake muttered when he saw Shadow. "Get him inside. Now." Keanu didn't hesitate. He carried Shadow into the jet, his own body screaming in exhaustion. Shadow let out a weak whine, his head resting against Keanu's chest. "I know, buddy," Keanu whispered. "Just hold on." The engines roared to life. Jake rushed forward, medical kit in hand. "You keep pressure on the wound. I'll stabilize him." Keanu nodded, pressing down on Shadow's side, feeling the warmth of his best friend's blood. Then a sharp beeping. Jake cursed. "They're coming." Keanu looked up. Through the cockpit window, a fleet of Black Veil helicopters appeared on the horizon. They had one chance. Keanu grabbed Jake's radio. "Pilot, get us in the air. Now." The pilot didn't argue. The jet lurched forward, engines roaring as it accelerated down the makeshift runway. Gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets ripped through the fuselage, sparks flying. Keanu held onto Shadow tighter. Then the jet lifted. They were airborne. Jake worked fast, injecting Shadow with something to slow the bleeding. Keanu watched, his heart hammering. "Is he?" "He's alive," Jake muttered. "But just barely." Keanu exhaled, gripping Shadow's paw. "You hear that, buddy? You're gonna make it." Shadow's eyes fluttered open. For the first time since the fight, his tail moved, just a little. Keanu let out a soft chuckle. "Eyes stinging. Yeah, you're tough." Shadow blinked slowly. Then, for the first time, he closed his eyes not from pain, but from trust. Keanu held onto him. "Rest, buddy. I got you." Jake leaned forward, holding up the USB drive. "This is it." Keanu nodded. "Everything. The proof to take them down." Jake studied it. "Then we finish this." Keanu exhaled. "Yeah." Days later, the truth about Black Veil was exposed. The files on Project Revenant went public. Governments launched investigations. The organization that had hunted Shadow dismantled. Keanu watched the news from the side of Shadow's hospital bed. His best friend was still breathing. Bandages covered Shadow's wounds, but he was alive. And when he finally opened his eyes and looked at Keanu knew they had won. And Shadow? He was finally free. Months later, Keanu stood at a ranch in the mountains, watching as Shadow ran across an open field. His movements strong, his tail wagging freely. Keanu smiled. Not bad for a retired hero. Ha! Shadow barked once, as if laughing. Keanu chuckled. Yeah, you earned it. As the sun set, man and dog stood side by side, partners, survivors, family, because in the end, Shadow hadn't just been saving Keanu,